Before we dive into this incredible tale of sacrifice and legend, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more amazing historical stories. Hit that like button if you're enjoying the content, and drop a comment letting us know where in the world you're watching from. Your support means everything to us. Now let's journey back to the age of Vikings. The bitter North Sea wind howled across the jagged cliffs of Ravenshollow, carrying with it the scent of salt, seaweed, and something far more sinister, the acrid smoke that had been rising from the village below for 3 days straight. Eric Ironwolf stood at the edge of the precipice, his weathered hands gripping the ancient runestone that marked the boundary between the world of men and the realm of shadows. At 28 winters, Eric had already lived longer than most warriors in his clan. His auburn beard, streaked with premature grey, whipped in the fierce wind as he gazed down at what remained of Ravenshollow. The Viking settlement that had once housed over 300 souls now lay in smouldering ruins. The great longhouses, their timber walls carved with protective runes and family crests, were nothing more than charred skeletons against the grey sky. The dragon had come at dawn 3 days past. It was not the first time such a creature had terrorized the northern settlements. The old skalds spoke of dragons in their epic poems, terrible beasts that emerged from the depths of the earth when the gods grew angry with mankind. But those were tales meant to frighten children and teach lessons about humility before the divine powers. This dragon, this monstrous embodiment of fire and fury, was devastatingly real. Eric's blue eyes, the color of winter ice, traced the path of destruction that wound through his village like a serpent's trail. The creature had been methodical in its assault, starting with the grain stores and moving systematically through the residential areas. Only the sacred grove at the village's heart remained untouched, its ancient oak trees standing like silent sentinels over the devastation. "The gods have abandoned us," whispered Astrid Ravenclaw, Eric's closest friend since childhood. She approached from behind, her footsteps muffled by the thick moss that covered the clifftop. At 25, she possessed the fierce beauty common to Norse women, sharp cheekbones, piercing green eyes, and platinum blonde hair that she wore in intricate braids adorned with silver rings and amber beads. Astrid had been one of only 17 survivors who managed to escape the dragon's initial attack. They had fled to these cliffs, seeking refuge in the network of caves that honeycombed the coastal rocks. For 3 days, they had watched their home burn, helpless to intervene against a force of such overwhelming power. "Perhaps," Eric replied, his voice barely audible above the wind. "Or perhaps the gods test us to see who among us has the courage to act when hope seems lost." The dragon itself was unlike anything described in the old stories. Where the skalds spoke of creatures the size of longships, this beast dwarfed even the largest Viking vessels. Its scales gleamed like polished obsidian, each one the size of a warrior's shield. When it spread its wings, they blocked out the sun, casting the entire village in shadow. Its eyes burned like twin forges, and when it opened its maw to breathe fire, the sound was like thunder splitting the heavens. But it was not merely the dragon's size that made it so terrifying, it was its intelligence. This was no mindless beast driven by hunger or instinct. The creature had studied Ravenshollow before attacking, circling the settlement for days while remaining just out of range of their ballistae and catapults. It had learned their routines, identified their weaknesses, and struck with the precision of a master tactician. "Look there!" Astrid pointed toward the village square, where a massive shape moved among the ruins. The dragon had taken up residence in what had once been the Great Hall, the community building where the clan gathered for feasts, council meetings, and religious ceremonies. Its black bulk coiled around the remaining timber supports like a gigantic serpent, its head occasionally rising to survey its conquered domain. Eric studied the creature's movements, searching for any pattern or weakness he might exploit. The dragon seemed to be guarding something. Whenever smaller scavenger birds approached the ruins, it would drive them away with small bursts of flame. But what could possibly interest such a powerful being among the ashes of a human settlement? The children, he said suddenly, the realization hitting him like a physical blow. Astrid's face went pale. You think they're still alive? During the initial attack, chaos had reigned supreme. Families had been separated, and in the smoke and confusion, many of the youngest villagers had simply vanished. The survivors had assumed the worst, that they had perished in the flames like so many others. But what if the dragon had taken them alive for some purpose? The thought filled Eric with a cold rage that burned brighter than any dragon's fire. As the clan's primary scout and tracker, he had been responsible for the safety of every person in Raven's Hollow. The weight of his perceived failure pressed down on him like a mountain. But beneath that crushing guilt lay something else, a desperate determination to set things right. I'm going down there, he announced, his hand moving instinctively to the battle-axe hanging from his belt. That's madness, Astrid protested. You'd be walking into certain death. That thing killed Harold the Bold and his entire warband in minutes. What can one man do against such a monster? Harold the Bold had been Ravenshollow's Jarl, a legendary warrior who had raided from Ireland to the Byzantine Empire. He commanded respect from Jarls across the northern kingdoms and had never been defeated in single combat. When the dragon first appeared, Harold had led 20 of his finest warriors in a direct assault on the beast. None of them had survived. Eric watched the smoke rise from the village below, each wisp carrying with it the memory of lives lost and dreams destroyed. His wife, Ingrid, had perished in the dragon's first pass over the residential quarter. Their son, barely 3 winters old, had been among the missing children. The pain of their loss was a constant ache in his chest, but he had learned to channel that suffering into something useful, purpose. Perhaps one man cannot defeat a dragon, Eric admitted, but one man might be able to discover what it wants, why it stays, why it guards the ruins instead of flying away to terrorize other settlements. The wind shifted, bringing with it the sound that had haunted their refugees for 3 days, children crying. The sound was faint, barely distinguishable from the wind's howl, but unmistakably human. Somewhere in those ruins, the youngest members of their clan still lived. Astrid's expression softened as she too heard the distant cries. As the village's primary healer and midwife, she had helped bring many of those children into the world. The thought of them suffering while she remained safely hidden in the caves was unbearable. If you're determined to throw your life away, she said quietly, at least let me help you plan properly. The dragon seems to rest during the deepest part of the night, between the hours when the moon reaches its zenith and when the first hints of dawn touch the eastern horizon. That might be your only chance to get close. Eric nodded gratefully. Astrid possessed one of the sharpest tactical minds in the clan, a skill that had served them well during raids against Saxon monasteries and Frankish trading posts. If anyone could devise a plan to infiltrate a dragon's lair, it would be her. They spent the remainder of the day observing the creature's patterns and studying the village layout for potential approach routes. The dragon's behavior followed a predictable cycle. It would patrol the skies around the settlement for several hours after sunrise, return to the Great Hall to rest during midday, emerge again in the evening for another patrol, and then settle in for the night around the ruins of the sacred grove. As darkness fell over Raven's Hollow, Eric made his final preparations. He had chosen to go lightly armed. His grandfather's sayax, a razor-sharp fighting knife that had been blessed by the old gods, and a small round shield painted with his family's raven crest. Heavy armor would only slow him down, and conventional weapons would be useless against the dragon's scales anyway. "Remember," Astrid said, as she helped him darken his face and hands with charcoal, "your goal is information, not glory. Find out what the dragon wants, locate the children if they're still alive, and return to us. Don't try to be a hero." But as Eric made his way down the treacherous cliff path toward the smoldering village below, he knew that heroism might be the only option left to them. The dragon had not simply attacked their home, it had torn apart the fabric of their community, scattered their people, and defiled everything they held sacred. Someone had to make a stand, even if that stand was futile. The closer he got to the village, the more overwhelming the devastation became. Houses that had stood for generations were reduced to ash and blackened timber. The carefully tended gardens where the village women grew herbs and vegetables were scorched wastelands. Even the harbor, where their longships had once been moored, was filled with debris and the twisted remains of vessels that had been caught in the dragon's fiery breath. But it was the silence that affected Eric most deeply. Ravenshollow had always been a place of life and activity. Children playing in the streets, craftsmen working in their shops, warriors training in the practice yards. Now, the only sounds were the wind whistling through broken timbers and the distant, intermittent crying that had drawn him down from the cliffs. As he approached the great hall, Eric could make out the dragon's massive form coiled among the ruins. The creature's breathing created small puffs of smoke that drifted up into the starlight, and occasionally its eyes would open to scan the surrounding area before closing again. It was definitely sleeping, but its rest seemed shallow and easily disturbed. Eric circled wide around the dragon's position, using the ruins of smaller buildings as cover. His years of experience as a scout served him well. He knew how to move silently across different types of terrain, how to use shadows and obstacles to remain invisible to watching eyes. But he had never attempted to sneak past a dragon before, and every instinct screamed at him to flee from this unnatural predator. The crying sounds grew louder as he approached the sacred grove. The ancient oaks had somehow survived the dragon's assault, their massive trunks unmarked by fire. Beneath their protective canopy, Eric could make out a series of small structures that had not been there before the attack, crude pens constructed from salvaged timber and rope. His heart clenched as he realized what he was seeing. The dragon had indeed taken the village children alive, and it was keeping them prisoner in makeshift cages beneath the sacred trees. But why? What possible use could a dragon have for human children? Eric counted at least 15 small forms huddled together in the largest pen. They ranged in age from toddlers barely able to walk to adolescents on the verge of adulthood. Most were sleeping fitfully, but a few were awake, their soft sobs contributing to the sounds that had guided him here. Among the captives, he spotted his own son, Leif. The 3-year-old was curled up against an older girl who seemed to be trying to comfort the younger children. The sight filled Eric with such powerful emotion that he had to grip his knife handle to keep his hands from shaking. But as he studied the scene more carefully, Eric noticed something that made his blood run cold. The dragon had not simply captured the children randomly. It had specifically selected the youngest and most vulnerable members of their community. These were not potential slaves or sacrifices in the traditional sense. They were something else entirely. A shadow passed overhead, and Eric pressed himself flat against the ground as the dragon's massive form glided through the starlight. The creature was not asleep after all. It was hunting, searching the village ruins for any signs of the survivors it knew must be hiding somewhere nearby. Eric held his breath as the dragon circled the sacred grove 3 times before settling back down onto its perch atop the great hall ruins. He had learned something crucial. The dragon was intelligent enough to know that some villagers had escaped, and it was actively trying to locate them. But why keep the children alive while hunting the adults? What did this creature ultimately want from them? As dawn approached, Eric knew he had to return to the cliff caves with his intelligence. He had confirmed that many of the missing children were alive, learned about the dragon's hunting patterns, and discovered that the creature's lair was centered around the sacred grove rather than just the great hall. But he still had no answers to the most important questions. The journey back up the cliff face was harrowing. Several times, loose rocks gave way beneath his hands or feet, sending small avalanches tumbling down toward the village below. Each sound seemed thunderously loud in the pre-dawn quiet, and Eric expected at any moment to hear the dragon's roar and see flames rushing up toward him from below. But he made it safely back to the cave network, where the other survivors waited. Astrid met him at the entrance, her face etched with worry and exhaustion. "Well?" she asked simply. "The children live," Eric reported, his voice hoarse with emotion. "At least 15 of them, penned like livestock beneath the sacred oaks. But the dragon hunts at night, searching for us. It knows we're out here somewhere." The news spread quickly through the refugee camps. Parents who had given their children up for dead wept with relief, while others demanded immediate action to rescue the captives. But Eric counseled patience. They needed to understand more about their enemy before attempting any rescue operation. As the sun rose over the devastated village below, Eric stood once again at the cliff's edge, watching the dragon settle in for its daytime rest. The creature had become the center of his world, the focal point around which all his thoughts and plans revolve. Somewhere in that intelligent alien mind lay the key to understanding this entire catastrophe. But first, he needed to survive long enough to find that key. The second night brought a revelation that changed everything Eric thought he knew about dragons, gods, and the nature of sacrifice itself. He had spent the entire day studying the ancient runestones that dotted the clifftop, searching for any mention of dragons in the old inscriptions. Most of the stones commemorated victories in battle or honored deceased clan leaders, but 3 of the oldest markers contained references to the Great Serpent of Endings and the Firebringer who demands the price. Astrid had made her own discoveries among the surviving scrolls and artifacts they had managed to salvage from the village. Hidden in the deepest cave of their refuge, she had spread out a collection of ancient texts that told a story far different from the heroic dragon-slaying sagas Eric had grown up hearing. "Look at this," she said, pointing to a passage written in Old Norse runes. "This is from the Chronicle of Jarl Thorvald, written over 2 centuries ago. He describes an encounter with a dragon that matches our creature exactly." Eric leaned closer to study the faded ink. The chronicle described a great black dragon that had appeared during a time of severe hardship. Failed harvests, bitter winters, and plague had reduced Thorvald's people to starvation. The dragon had demanded a tribute of children in exchange for revealing the location of a hidden treasure that would save the clan from extinction. "A tribute," Eric murmured. "Not food, not sacrifice in the traditional sense. A tribute." "Keep reading," Astrid urged. The chronicle went on to describe how Thorvald had initially refused the dragon's demand, leading his warriors in a series of unsuccessful attacks against the creature. Only after half his people had died of starvation did the Jarl finally agree to the dragon's terms. 7 children, volunteers between the ages of 7 and 14, had been handed over to the beast. What happened next defied everything Eric understood about dragon behavior. Rather than devouring the children, the dragon had taken them to a sacred grove, just as their own dragon had done, and kept them there for exactly 7 days and 7 nights. During that time, the creature had taught them something that the chronicle referred to only as the deep knowledge. On the 8th day, the dragon had released 6 of the 7 children, each carrying detailed maps that led to vast deposits of silver and iron ore hidden in the mountains. The wealth generated by these discoveries had transformed Thorvald's clan from starving refugees into one of the most powerful houses in the northern kingdoms. But one child had remained with the dragon permanently. "What happened to the 7th child?" Eric asked. Astrid turned the page, revealing an illustration that made Eric's blood freeze in his veins. It showed a young boy, perhaps 10 years old, standing beside the dragon with his hand resting on the creature's massive snout. Both the child and the dragon were surrounded by swirling runes that seemed to dance across the parchment, even in the flickering torchlight. "The boy became something else," Astrid read from the text below the illustration. "No longer fully human, but not dragon either. He served as the bridge between the 2 worlds, the translator who could understand both mortal needs and ancient wisdom." Eric stared at the image for a long time, his mind struggling to process this information. Everything he had assumed about their situation was wrong. The dragon wasn't simply a monster terrorizing their village for sport or food. It was following some ancient pattern, fulfilling a role that connected to the deepest mysteries of their faith and culture. There are 6 more chronicles here, Astrid continued, spreading out additional scrolls, all describing similar events. Dragons appearing during times of crisis, demanding children as tribute, and ultimately providing solutions to problems that seemed insurmountable. But the pattern wasn't random. Each chronicle described careful selection criteria. The dragons chose children based on specific qualities that weren't immediately obvious to adult observers. Intelligence, certainly, but also something deeper. A capacity for what the texts called dual sight, the ability to perceive both the physical world and the realm of spirits simultaneously. As Eric absorbed this information, a terrible understanding began to dawn on him. The dragon hadn't attacked Ravenshollow out of malice or hunger. It had come because their community was facing a crisis that conventional solutions couldn't address. The failed fishing seasons, the increasingly brutal winters, the diseases that had been claiming their livestock, these weren't random misfortunes. They were symptoms of a deeper imbalance that required intervention from powers beyond the mortal world. "We have to go back down there," Eric said quietly. "Not to fight or rescue, but to communicate." Astrid shook her head vigorously. The chronicles also mentioned that most attempts at communication ended in death. Only children can safely approach these creatures. Adults who try are seen as threats and eliminated immediately. But Eric was already forming a plan, one that required him to abandon every concept of heroism and glory he had ever held dear. If the dragon was following ancient patterns, then there might be a way to work within those patterns rather than against them. What if an adult volunteered to become the 7th child, he asked. The question hung in the air between them like smoke from a funeral pyre. Astrid stared at him with growing horror as she realized what he was suggesting. "Eric, no. The transformation described in these texts, it's not something that can be reversed. You would cease to be human in any meaningful sense." "Would I cease to be myself?" The chronicles aren't clear about that. Some suggest the chosen ones retain their personalities and memories. Others indicate they become something entirely different, more dragon than human. Eric thought of his son, sleeping fitfully in the dragon's makeshift pen. He thought of the other children, torn from their families and thrust into a situation no young person should have to face. Most of all, he thought of the long chain of suffering that would continue if someone didn't break the cycle. How does one volunteer for such a transformation? Astrid closed the chronicles with trembling hands. According to these texts, the volunteer must approach the dragon alone, unarmed, and offer themselves in place of the children. But Eric, there's no guarantee the creature will accept such a substitution. Dragons seem to prefer actual children, for reasons the chronicles don't explain. Then I'll have to convince it that I can serve its purposes better than a child could. The rest of the day passed in preparation that felt like funeral rites. Eric spent time with each of the other survivors, sharing memories and settling any outstanding disputes. He wrote letters to distant relatives, explaining what had happened to Ravenshollow and asking them to look after any survivors who might make it to their territories. Most importantly, he spent the afternoon in meditation, drawing upon the spiritual practices his grandfather had taught him. If he was going to approach a dragon with nothing but words and willpower, he would need to achieve a state of mental clarity that transcended normal human consciousness. As sunset approached, Eric made his way down the cliff path for what he knew would be the final time. He carried no weapons, wore no armor, and brought nothing except a small leather pouch containing his most precious possessions: a lock of his wife's hair, a toy his son had carved from driftwood, and the silver arm ring that had belonged to his grandfather. The village seemed different in the twilight hours. The ruins that had looked chaotic and devastating in daylight now revealed subtle patterns and structures. The dragon hadn't simply destroyed Ravenshollow, it had reorganized the physical space according to principles that human minds couldn't easily grasp. The creature itself was awake and alert as Eric approached the Great Hall ruins. Its massive head turned to track his movement, and its eyes began to glow with an inner fire that illuminated the surrounding wreckage. But it made no move to attack, seemingly curious about this lone human walking openly toward its domain. Eric stopped at the edge of what he judged to be the dragon's immediate territory, roughly 50 paces from the creature's coiled form. Close enough to speak, far enough to avoid triggering an immediate defensive response. "Great One!" he called out, his voice carrying clearly in the still evening air. "I come to you not as an enemy or a thief, but as one who seeks understanding." The dragon's eyes narrowed and a small puff of smoke escaped its nostrils. When it spoke, its voice was like distant thunder rolling across mountains, deep and resonant and utterly alien. "You are the scout, the one who watches from the shadows and thinks his movements go unnoticed." The fact that it could speak at all shocked Eric, though the chronicles had mentioned this ability. More disturbing was the creature's casual revelation that it had been aware of his reconnaissance all along. "I am Eric Ironwolf, son of Magnus, grandson of Bjorn the Far Traveller. I speak for what remains of the clan of Ravenshollow. You speak for 17 frightened souls, cowering in cliff caves," the dragon corrected, "a pathetic remnant of what was once a proud people." The words stung, but Eric forced himself to remain calm. This was a test of some kind, a probing of his character and resolve. "We were proud," he agreed, "perhaps too proud. We ignored the signs of change, clung to old ways when new approaches were needed. Our pride has brought us to this." The dragon's massive head tilted slightly, a gesture that might have been approval or amusement. "At least you possess the wisdom to recognize your failures. Most humans die still believing they are victims of cosmic injustice rather than consequences of their own choices." Eric took a step forward, then another. The dragon watched but didn't retreat or threaten. "The children you hold, they are innocent of whatever sins brought you here. If sacrifice is required, let it be made by those who bear responsibility for our situation." "The children are not sacrifices," the dragon replied, its tone suggesting this was an important distinction. "They are students. I am teaching them to see patterns that adult minds cannot perceive, to understand connections that span generations and centuries. Then teach me instead." The words came out before Eric could second-guess them, carrying with them the weight of absolute commitment. The dragon's eyes flared brighter, and Eric felt the creature's attention focus on him with an intensity that was almost physical. "You would take their place. Submit to transformation that would strip away everything you believe yourself to be. If it would return them safely to their families, yes." The dragon was silent for a long moment, and Eric could feel it examining not just his words, but his intentions, his fears, his deepest motivations. The scrutiny was unlike anything he had ever experienced, a complete dissection of his soul by an intelligence that understood mortal psychology better than most humans understood themselves. "You speak of noble sacrifice," the dragon said eventually. "But your true motivation is guilt. You failed to protect your wife and child, failed to provide leadership when your people needed it most. You seek not to save these children, but to punish yourself for your perceived failures." The accuracy of this assessment hit Eric like a physical blow. He had told himself he was acting from altruism, but the dragon's words revealed the self-serving nature of his heroic gesture. "Does motivation matter if the outcome serves your purposes?" he asked. "Motivation is everything. The transformation I offer changes not just the body, but the essence of what a being is. Those driven by guilt or desire for glory become monsters. Only those motivated by genuine love and acceptance can retain enough humanity to serve as bridges between worlds." Eric felt the conversation slipping away from him. If guilt and heroism were disqualifying factors, what possible motivation could he claim that would satisfy the dragon's requirements? "Then why do you choose children?" he asked. "What do they possess that adults lack?" "Wonder. Children see the world as it truly is, a place of infinite possibility where the boundaries between reality and dreams are fluid. Adults see only limitations, categories, the narrow definitions that make complex truths seem simple and manageable. The dragon shifted position, its massive coils rearranging themselves with surprising grace. But occasionally, an adult retains enough of their childhood perspective to be useful. You have spent your life as a scout, always watching, always seeing patterns that others miss. In some ways, you are still the curious child who climbed trees to see beyond the horizon. Eric felt a strange sensation, as if something vast and ancient was reaching into his mind, examining memories and experiences he had long forgotten. The dragon wasn't just reading his thoughts, it was tracing the development of his consciousness from childhood through adulthood, mapping the moments when wonder had given way to cynicism, when possibility had been replaced by resignation. "I can offer you a choice," the dragon said finally. "Return to your cave and live out your days as a survivor, carrying the knowledge that you were too afraid to act when action was needed. Or step forward and accept transformation that will allow you to save not just these children, but your entire people." What would I become? Something new, neither fully human nor truly dragon, but a bridge between the two states of being. You would retain your memories, your essential personality, but gain access to knowledge and perspectives that span millennia. You would see the world as both predator and prey, mortal and eternal, limited and infinite. Eric looked toward the sacred grove where the children waited. His son would be among them, probably awake now and crying for his father. The decision should have been simple. Any parent would sacrifice themselves to save their child. But the dragon's offer carried implications that extended far beyond personal sacrifice. If I accept, what happens to Raven's Hollow, to the survivors? They receive the knowledge necessary to rebuild their community on a foundation that will last for generations. Hidden resources will be revealed, new technologies shared, alliances forged with powers they cannot currently imagine. Your people will become legends, their story told around fires for centuries to come. And if I refuse, the children will be returned unharmed in 7 days, as the ancient patterns require. But your people will remain trapped in cycles of decline that will eventually lead to extinction. Within 50 years, the name of Raven's Hollow will be forgotten. The choice, when viewed in those terms, wasn't really a choice at all. Eric thought of his grandfather's stories about the great heroes of the past, men and women who had made impossible decisions that saved their communities at tremendous personal cost. Perhaps this was his moment to join that legendary company. "I accept," he said simply. The transformation began immediately. 500 years have passed since Eric Ironwolf made his choice beneath the starlit sky of Raven's Hollow. The village that once lay in ruins has become the foundation of one of the most prosperous kingdoms in the known world, its people renowned for their wisdom, their prosperity, and their mysterious knowledge of hidden things. Scholars still debate the truth behind the ancient chronicles that describe the dragon's bargain and Eric's transformation. Some dismiss the tales as elaborate mythology, created to explain the sudden rise of the Raven's Hollow dynasty. Others point to the archaeological evidence, the remains of a great hall built on dragon-scale foundations, the intricate network of caves that served as refuge during the crisis, the rune stones that describe events matching the chronicle accounts in precise detail. But in the deepest archives of the kingdom, accessible only to the royal family and their most trusted advisors, more concrete evidence remains. Ancient treaties written in scripts that blend human runes with symbols no mortal hand could have crafted. Maps of trade routes that connect the known world to places that exist only in legend. And most mysterious of all, a series of portraits showing the same figure, tall, ageless, with eyes that hold depths of knowledge no human should possess, appearing at crucial moments throughout the kingdom's history. The children who witnessed Eric's transformation became the first generation of the new Raven's Hollow nobility. Their descendants still speak of the night when their ancestor chose to become something more than human, transforming himself into a guardian spirit that watches over their people from the shadows between worlds. They say that in times of great crisis, when the kingdom faces challenges that conventional wisdom cannot solve, a figure appears at the edge of vision, neither fully man nor entirely other. He offers counsel to those brave enough to listen, guidance that comes from perspectives spanning both mortal experience and draconic wisdom. The dragon itself vanished after Eric's transformation, returning to whatever realm such creatures call home. But the knowledge it shared, filtered through Eric's human understanding and love for his people, became the foundation for innovations that changed the course of history. And somewhere, in the space between legend and reality, Eric Ironwolf continues his eternal watch, no longer the man he was, not yet the monster he feared to become, but something unprecedented, a bridge between worlds, a guardian shaped by sacrifice, and a reminder that the greatest heroes are often those who choose transformation over victory, wisdom over glory, and service over self. The children of Raven's Hollow still sing songs about the night their father's friend became their protector for all time, and in those songs they remember not just his sacrifice, but his promise, that as long as his people face their challenges with courage and wisdom, they will never face them alone. Thank you for joining us on this incredible journey through Viking legend and sacrifice. If this story moved you, please subscribe to our channel for more historical tales that blur the line between myth and reality. Hit that like button to help others discover these amazing stories, and don't forget to comment below with your thoughts about Eric's choice. Would you have made the same sacrifice? We love hearing from our community around the world.